Was California Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna. He's a member of the House Oversight Committee, which has had interview requests denied by Trump associates. Congressman, thank you for taking a few minutes. Well, we played the sound earlier from one of your colleagues floating that idea of, hey, if these Trump folks will not comply with these subpoenas, they should be threatened with jail time. Is that something Democrats in Congress are talking about? And is that even something Democrats in Congress could have any ability to do?
Well, first, it's important to understand how unprecedented this is by the Trump White House. Yes, the executive branch always has a conflict with Congress, but in the past, the Clinton administration, Obama administration, has allowed White House aides to testify. Now, we do have the power to hold people in contempt, and as Hillary Clinton's op-ed recently articulated, Sam Erwin, during the Watergate hearing, actually threatened to send the sergeant of arms to get people and put them in prison if people didn't testify.
The sergeant of arms in the Capitol jail, I guess? I mean, is that something you're actually talking about?
Well, I think it's something that Congress has the inherent power to do. But usually what happens is that the White House, even the Nixon White House, cooperates. They realize that they don't want to take something nearly that far. And I would hope that a lot of these individuals wouldn't want to be held in contempt of Congress, that they wouldn't want to escalate to that point, and they would do that something that every other White House did, which is to testify and respect the separation of powers that our Constitution calls for.
But there have been fights before. There have been fights that have stretched out for years over this question of, you know, should the subpoena be respected or not. One of your colleagues, Jackie Spear, Democrat from California, she said ultimately the power of Congress to hold somebody in contempt is symbolic, ultimately. Do you agree with that?
I think it's symbolic, but it has real-world consequences. I mean, if you ask most Americans who have future career aspirations, it doesn't look good to be held in contempt of Congress, and it certainly isn't a signal of transparency. So I think a lot of people here are conflicted between what's good for their own standing as citizens, what's good for their own careers, and their loyalty to a president. And it's unfortunate that the president is forcing his own staff to have that kind of a choice.
You said in an interview you felt the Trump administration was trying to run the clock. I mentioned we've seen before administrations defy subpoenas. It gets kicked over to the court. There's an example. I think it was with Harriet Miers during the George W. Bush years. Right. She defied a subpoena in June of 2007 at the White House's request. It did go through the courts. The courts did tell her to testify. The testimony took place in June 2009, 2 years later.
You're absolutely right, and I think that's their strategy. The difference is other administrations do that in isolated cases, like George W. Bush did with Harriet Miers. Here you have a systematic attempt to prevent any witness on any topic from appearing before Congress, and we've never really seen anything as blatant as what this White House is doing.
This sets up the decision of you and your Democratic colleagues to try to pursue investigations here. This fight that's now been precipitated over subpoenas, it figures to keep this question of the Mueller report, your reaction to it, in the news, in the front and center of political debate for a while. There is this new poll out today, raises the question of, should Donald Trump be impeached for this? It was 37% yes, 56% no. Is there, we saw a little bit of this with Bill Clinton 20 years ago. Is there a move-on message there for Democrats in Congress in that finding?
Steve, I don't think so. I think most Americans want to hear from Bob Mueller. They want to hear from these White House aides about what happened, and they should make that judgment for themselves once they hear testimony. But I do think it's important to note that the House Democrats, we've passed sweeping gun safety legislation, we've passed sweeping campaign finance legislation, and we're focused on health care, jobs, and infrastructure. Those things don't often get the media attention, but the House Democrats are focused on a positive agenda for the country.
I'm just wondering, though, because I remember when the Barr summary of the Mueller report first came out, and I heard a lot of Democrats, excuse me, who were out there saying, well, you know what? Essentially, you know what, it's just as well, because every voter I talk to is not talking about Russia, is not talking about Mueller. They are talking about health care. They're talking about jobs. They're talking about the economy. You're even saying right now it sounds like you're having a bit of difficulty getting the message out on those fronts. Does that factor into your strategy on this at all going forward? Should it?
No, because we have a constitutional duty, and most Americans do believe that we should hold the president accountable and make sure that there's a clear message that no one in this country is above the law. And if there were things that were done that aren't technically illegal, then maybe we need to strengthen the law so it never happens again. I believe when people elect you to Congress, they expect you to do two things. They expect you to work on the positive agenda for people, but they also expect you to uphold your duty of office and hold the executive branch accountable. That goes back to Federalist 51 in Madison's understanding of Congress. We have to do both.
All right, Congressman Ro Khanna, Democrat from California, thank you for taking a few minutes.